The black driver Elena Voss had just laughed at was the only person in that limousine who could stop her billion-dollar deal from collapsing. The call was on speaker. Elena's voice filled the leather interior. Sharp, practiced, the kind of voice that had learned to sound expensive. "If you can't commit, we walk away first. That is not a threat. That is our position." On the other end, a pause. Then Hiroshi Tanaka's representative said, in English, "Of course, one moment." And then, because the call was live, because no one in Tanaka's Tokyo office had any reason to believe anyone in this car understood Japanese, Tanaka spoke quietly to the man beside him in his own language. His words were unguarded and direct. He said that this woman treated partnership like a transaction she was already tired of, that she had never learned how to receive, that the Singapore group understood what a relationship cost, that they should not waste more time here. The man beside him replied, "Give her one more minute, then close it down gracefully." In the front seat, Marcus Hale heard every word. He had one earbud in, a German podcast on Hanseatic trade history, and one ear open, the way he had kept one ear open in every professional room he had worked in for 20 years. Not a habit he chose anymore, just how he operated. He understood exactly what Tanaka had said. He understood exactly what it meant. He reached forward and turned off the radio. "Ms. Voss," he said, eyes on the highway, voice level. "The call quality is dropping. You may want to reconnect before the next exchange." It was the most careful thing he could offer. A pause. A reset. 30 seconds to change the register of the conversation before the other side made a decision that would be very hard to reverse. Elena turned. She looked at him. A half-second of genuine confusion, and then a decision snapped into place behind her eyes. A decision she had made long ago about which voices belonged to which rooms, fully formed and entirely unself-conscious. She laughed. Not a long laugh, a short exhale through the nose. The kind that is worse than an insult because it does not bother to be one. "You're just a black driver," she said. "Don't think you belong in this world." Rebecca Chen, her executive assistant, did not look up from the laptop she had stopped typing on. Her voice was flat and final. "Drivers don't speak here." Marcus said nothing. He faced forward. His hands returned to the wheel, 10 and 2, grip tightening by degrees. His jaw set, and his left thumb moved, without his awareness, to the small pin on his collar. Matte black enamel, thin gold border, a specific emblem that meant nothing to anyone who did not know, and everything to anyone who did. Elena reconnected the call. "Tanaka-san, apologies. Technical issue. As I was saying, our position is firm." Tanaka's voice came back, smooth and unhurried. "Of course, Ms. Voss. We understand your position very clearly." Through the line, almost inaudible now, two voices continued in Japanese. The easy, unguarded exchange of people who believe they are completely alone. Marcus caught it, processed it, filed it. His grip tightened on the wheel. He said nothing. But the silence coming from the front seat was not the silence of a man who had accepted his place. It was the silence of a man who could see exactly what was burning, who knew every exit, and who had not yet decided whether the cost of using one was a cost he could afford to pay. Again. To understand why Marcus held that silence, and why it nearly cost everyone in that car far more than they realized, you have to go back 3 years. 3 years, one hallway conversation, a hospital room, and the decision a man made when someone powerful handed him the easy answer, and he gave the honest one instead. 3 years earlier, Marcus Hale sat across from a deputy undersecretary in a glass-walled conference room at the State Department's Foggy Bottom headquarters, and listened to a man explain, with the particular gentleness of someone who has never lost anything significant, why his position was being eliminated. "It's not performance-based," the man said. You understand that, Marcus. The division is being consolidated. 7 interpreter positions across the board. Marcus nodded. He had been nodding in rooms like this for 15 years. Not out of agreement, but out of discipline. The practiced skill of a man who had learned to receive information without telegraphing reaction, to hold his face still while his mind moved several steps ahead. He had done this in Geneva, in Riyadh, in Seoul, in Hamburg, in New Delhi. He had been in rooms where the wrong expression at the wrong moment could fracture a negotiation that had taken years to build. Stillness, for Marcus, was not passivity. It was the most precise tool he owned. By any measure, he was exceptional at his work. A doctorate in international relations, 10 languages, Japanese, Mandarin, German, Korean, Hindi, Arabic, French, Spanish, Portuguese, English. Not conversational fluency, but full professional command, built across 2 decades of high-level diplomatic interpretation. He had been lead interpreter at a major multilateral summit in Geneva, a session that had nearly collapsed twice before his team stabilized it through hours of back-channel work that never appeared in any official record, but that several senior diplomats had privately called the reason the agreement existed at all. The department knew this. They were eliminating his position anyway, because the new administration wanted to pilot AI-assisted interpretation at scale, and someone in procurement had convinced someone in budget that projected savings justified the transition risk. Marcus had reviewed the pilot assessments. He knew the error rates. He knew what it meant when a machine misread the honorific hierarchy in a Korean address or flattened the nuance out of an Arabic conditional clause. He had said so once in a meeting where his assessment had been solicited and then quietly set aside. But that was not the decision that cost him everything. The decision that cost him everything came the following week, in a hallway outside a closed briefing, when a senior official suggested, not directly, never directly, that a revised assessment, one softening his criticism of the AI program, might create flexibility around the staffing decisions. A small accommodation, the kind that moved careers forward, or at least kept them intact. Marcus had looked at the man for a long moment. Then he said, very politely, that he would submit an accurate assessment or no assessment at all. His position was eliminated 30 days later. He was 46 years old with a doctorate and a 15-year service record, and he was out. The timing was catastrophic. His mother, Dorothy, 71 years old, retired schoolteacher, the woman who had raised him alone in Southeast D.C. on a teacher's salary and an absolute conviction that her son would make something of himself, had been diagnosed with stage 2 ovarian cancer 8 months before the layoff. Treatment was proceeding. The bills were not small. The collection agency called on average 3 times a week, each message slightly harder than the last, calibrated to communicate that patience was running out. His daughter, Simone, was in her 2nd year of medical school. Fully committed, focused with the particular intensity of a young woman who had watched a parent carry difficulty with dignity and had quietly decided she would do the same. She did not know how bad the finances were. Marcus had made very sure of that. He found driving work through a private car service that contracted with corporate accounts, hotels, and airport transfers. The pay was steady. The hours were long. The work asked almost nothing of him, which was either a mercy or a slow erosion, depending on the day. He listened to language podcasts while he drove. German one morning, Mandarin the next, Arabic, Portuguese. Not because he needed the maintenance. He turned up the volume whenever a conjugation surprised him. That was the closest he got, most days, to feeling like himself. His hands shook sometimes. Not visibly. You would have to know what to look for. A faint tremor at the base of his right thumb, appearing under sustained stress, controlled by a specific grip on the wheel he had worked out through trial and error. And then there was the tie pin. He wore it every day, even with the car service uniform. The pin from the Geneva interpretation team, Matte black enamel, thin gold border, a specific emblem presented personally at the closing dinner of the summit. He touched it without thinking. When the collection agency left voicemails, when the hospital billing department called mid-shift, when a passenger said something that required him to decide in a fraction of a second whether to respond or hold. He had been dismissed before. That was what people outside his experience rarely understood. It was not the shock of Elena's laughter that pressed on him. It was the recognition. The low, ambient, unremarkable signal that certain spaces had hidden floor plans with sections marked in no language anyone ever needed to speak aloud. Not for you. He had learned to let it pass through rather than accumulate, to focus on the work, because the work was real and the dismissal was noise. But in that car, with the negotiation dying in real time, with Tanaka's team already scripting the graceful close, Marcus felt the specific discomfort of a man watching something fail that he knows exactly how to stop. He knew what had happened the last time he gave the honest answer. He was still paying for it. His thumb pressed the tie pin. The Fairmont's tower appeared above the tree line. His jaw was tight. His hands were steady. He had not decided anything yet. But the distance between what he knew and what he was permitted to say had begun pressing inward, and the window was not going to stay open much longer. The call with Tanaka ended 8 minutes later. Not with confrontation, with the careful, gracious, utterly decisive courtesy of people who have already decided to leave and are choosing not to let you feel the door close. Tanaka's representative said they would need to review certain aspects of the proposal further and would be in touch. Elena's shoulders leveled precisely. The adjustment of a woman deciding how much she could afford to feel right now. Rebecca closed her laptop without saving anything. Marcus kept his eyes on the road. For 90 seconds, no one in the limousine spoke. Then Rebecca's phone lit up. She looked at it, then at the back of Elena's headrest. Then she read it aloud, in the tone of someone delivering a message they did not write and cannot be held accountable for. From the board, message reads, "If this deal collapses, your position as CEO is at risk." The car went very still. Elena did not turn around. She sat with her hands folded in her lap and said nothing for a moment that stretched long enough to become its own kind of statement. "Keep driving," she said. Marcus kept driving. "I may be able to help," he said, quietly. 2 sentences worth of air. Elena turned. Her jaw tightened once and released, the precise, controlled response of a woman who processes threat by eliminating variables. "Did I ask you to speak?" "No," Marcus said. "Then stop." He stopped. Rebecca had already returned to her phone. She typed briefly, then looked up. "I've notified security at the Fairmont to keep the service areas separate from the conference floors. Staff at the elevator banks." The message was logistical on its surface. Its meaning was clear. Whatever happened at the hotel, Marcus would not be in the room where it happened. Marcus said nothing. He drove. And through the audio still bleeding from the line, the call not fully terminated, the connection not completely dropped, he could hear 2 voices in Tanaka's office speaking in Japanese with the ease of people who believed they were entirely unobserved. One said that she had no interpreter, that she did not even know she had insulted them. The other replied, "More than once." Marcus listened. His thumb found the tie pin. The Fairmont's tower rose above the tree line. The window for fixing any of this was measured in minutes now, not hours, and he was about to be locked out of the room. The conference suite on the 14th floor had been prepared 3 weeks in advance for a signing ceremony. Pale orchids on the credenza, water glasses filled, a catering arrangement assembled with specific attention to Japanese and Indian dietary preferences. 2 screens at the far end, one for Tanaka's team in Tokyo, one for Priya Singh's team in Mumbai. Both active, both waiting. The room had been built for a success that was no longer certain. Marcus had been directed, as Rebecca arranged, to the service corridor on the lobby level. A hotel staff member had walked him there with professional courtesy and left him at the service elevator with the clear, unspoken understanding that his access ended here. He sat. His phone showed 3 missed calls from the hospital billing department and 1 text from Simone. No punctuation, no emoji. The shorthand she used when she was trying not to alarm him. "Dad, call when you can." He types back, "Everything is fine. Talk tonight." He was not sure that was true. Through the corridor's ambient noise, he could hear the meeting above. Not words, but quality. The specific acoustic texture of a formal negotiation with too much silence in the wrong places. He stood. He took the service elevator to the 14th floor. He had not been told he could. He had not been told, with the specific clarity that would have made it unambiguous, that he could not. He stepped off and walked toward the voices. He did not make it to the door. 2 security officers were positioned exactly where Rebecca had arranged them. The one nearest the corridor junction stepped forward. "Sir, this floor is restricted." "I'm with the Voss party," Marcus said. "In what capacity?" A pause. "Driver," Marcus said. The officer's expression did not change. "Service staff check in at the lobby level. I can walk you back down." From inside the suite, through the partially open door at the end of the hall, Tanaka's voice came through with the specific cadence Marcus had been dreading. "Perhaps we should allow both teams additional time to consider the current framework." That sentence, in the vocabulary of Japanese corporate communication, meant the meeting was over. Then the suite door opened and Elena came out. She was looking at her phone. The board message again, forwarded now with a new line beneath it. "Livestream observers confirmed active." She looked up and saw Marcus. Her expression opened for one unguarded second, the look of someone caught being afraid, and then it closed hard and became something with no room left in it for careful. "You followed us up here." "I came to offer." "Security." Not loudly. A button pressed. "Rebecca?" Then, her voice dropping to the register that was always quieter and therefore always worse. "You had one job. Do you understand what happens when people like you forget what their job is?" "People like you." She did not explain. She did not need to. The phrase settled into the corridor air and was understood precisely by everyone present. The 2 security officers, the hotel event coordinator who had stepped from the adjacent service room and gone completely still against the wall. "The Tanaka Group," Marcus began. "You do not say his name to me." Quieter still. "You do not speak about negotiations. You do not insert yourself into professional spaces. And you do not," her eyes dropped to his phone, "bring your personal distractions into my environment." His phone was vibrating. The screen lit up. "Daughter." Elena looked at it. Then she stepped on it. Not in rage. That would have been simpler to absorb. She placed her heel on the phone with controlled, deliberate pressure, held it there, and looked at Marcus while she did it. "Do not let things like that disrupt my environment," she said. She lifted her foot. The screen had cracked diagonally across the face. 3 hotel staff members in the corridor had gone still. One of the security officers looked at the wall. Rebecca arrived in the suite doorway, registered the phone on the floor, and looked at it for exactly 1 second before returning to her own screen. Marcus looked down. Through the fractured glass, daughter was still calling. The vibration muffled now against the marble, but the screen still lit. Still trying. From inside the suite, Tanaka's voice came through the open door. "Ms. Voss, I believe it may be best to reconvene at a later date. We have much to consider." Elena turned back toward the suite. Her hand went to the doorframe. She was calculating its speed, how to present this to the board as a delay rather than a collapse. Marcus crouched and picked up the broken phone. The security officer touched his arm, gently and professionally, and began walking him toward the service elevator. Marcus went. He held the phone. Daughter. Still lit behind the cracked glass. He pressed the elevator button. The door opened. He did not get in. The conference suite had the particular quality of a room that has just finished failing. Tanaka's face was still on the primary screen. He had not disconnected. A courtesy, or the trained instinct of a man who never closed a door harder than necessary. His expression was composed and patient. Beside him, a younger associate reviewed something on a tablet with the studied neutrality of someone performing a formality. The decision had already been made. This was the ceremony for a conversation that was no longer going anywhere. Priya Singh's screen showed a woman who had been quiet for 13 minutes and was managing the silence with the ease of someone who had sat in many rooms where the correct action was simply to wait. Elena stood at the head of the table, posture level, expression controlled. Rebecca was at the side table, laptop open, not typing. The door opened. Marcus walked in. No announcement, no escort. He had walked back from the service elevator, past the security officer who had made a private judgment call in the seconds Marcus stood at the threshold, and through the door that had not fully closed behind Elena. He stopped in the center of the room. The two security officers appeared in the doorway and stopped there as well, because the way Marcus stood, the specific gravity of a man who has stopped pretending to be smaller than he is, made the act of removing him feel suddenly and noticeably more complicated than a simple procedure. Elena turned. I told you. Ms. Voss. Tanaka's voice. A new precision in it. Focused. Directed. Made every person in the room go still. He was not looking at Elena. He was looking at Marcus. More specifically, at the tie pin. He studied it for a long moment. Outside, October light was turning the glass of the building across the street a deep copper. Inside, no one moved. Tanaka said, in English, choosing each word with visible care. The man standing behind you. Forgive my interruption. A pause. Was he the lead interpreter at the Geneva Multilateral Conference? The silence that followed had a different texture than the silence before it. Elena did not answer. She did not know. Rebecca did not answer. Her eyes had locked onto the tie pin and would not move. She had looked at that emblem on his collar every day for months and had never once asked what it was. The matte black enamel, the thin gold border, the specific geometric device of a team that had walked into a collapsing summit and brought it back from the edge. She understood now what she had been looking at. Tanaka continued, quieter. I was a junior attaché at that summit. I watched the interpretation team work the final session, a 4-hour back-channel effort after a major delegation had walked out. The lead interpreter was a Black American. He addressed our delegation without a relay, in the correct register, with the correct honorific structure. We had never experienced that from an American interpreter, not once. A pause. His name was Marcus. On the second screen, Priya Singh leaned forward. Her expression had shifted from composed neutrality to something sharp and newly engaged. In the doorway, the security officers had not repositioned themselves in any visible way, but they were no longer functioning as escorts. They were simply watching. Elena's face. The face that had held its professional surface through 3 hours of a collapsing negotiation, came apart in the specific way of a person who has just discovered the ground beneath them was never as solid as they believed. Not shame yet. The shock came first. Then, already beginning, the arithmetic of everything she had said in the car, in the corridor, in this building, running fast and coming up wrong. Rebecca set her tablet down on the table. She looked at Marcus the way you look at a page that has just rewritten every page before us. Marcus had not said a word. He stood in the center of the room, looking at Tanaka's face on the screen. His expression held the particular steadiness of a man who has been invisible for a long time and is being seen from an unexpected direction by someone who knows exactly what they are looking at. Tanaka leaned slightly forward and asked directly and simply, whether it was him. The room waited. In Marcus's left hand, the shattered phone glowed faintly behind its cracked screen. Daughter. Still there, still trying. The tie pin caught the copper light from the building across the street, and for the first time since the limousine had pulled onto the highway, the weight in the room moved, not yet resolved, not yet complete, but unmistakably, visibly shifting away from one person and toward another. Marcus confirmed who he was and apologized for not making himself known earlier. He said the circumstances had not been his arrangement. Tanaka bowed toward the camera, not a gesture for the room, but a genuine acknowledgement, and said the fault lay with the circumstances, not with the man. Elena started to speak. Rebecca put a hand on Elena's arm, not aggressively, the motion of someone who has recalculated faster than the other person and is preventing a third mistake from landing on top of the first two. Elena stopped. Marcus turned to Priya Singh's screen and addressed her in Hindi, the formal northern register, the courtesy phrasing used between people who want to signal they understand the weight of what they are doing. He told her there was a question about Schedule C and the cultural liaison provisions that had not been addressed correctly, and asked if he could address it now. Priya Singh blinked. Then she laughed. Short, genuine, the laugh of a person who has just had an experience they were not expecting and finds it welcome. She said in Hindi, "Please." Elena had not understood a word of either exchange. For the first time in this building, in this company, in the entire professional ecosystem she had built and controlled for 12 years, her inability to follow a professional conversation was not a peripheral detail. It was the structural fact of the entire room. Marcus did not introduce himself. He did not ask to be given the floor. He simply began. He addressed Tanaka's team in Japanese first, identifying precisely which signal in Elena's earlier communication had registered as disrespect. The phrasing about walking away first, its implication in the context of a Japanese long-term business relationship, the way it had translated not as confidence, but as a declaration that the partnership's future value was already being discounted. He translated the core of this into English for Elena, not to embarrass her, but to allow the meeting to continue. He turned to the Voss Dynamics technical director, patched in on audio from the Berlin office, and addressed him in German. A single clarification on the infrastructure timeline that had been generating ambiguity in the written materials. The technical director confirmed in under 90 seconds. The point was closed. He turned back to the Tanaka screen and addressed a jurisdictional ambiguity in the secondary Memorandum of Understanding in French, a line visible in the original French subsidiary document and invisible in the English summary. Tanaka's associate looked up from his tablet and made a note. Then Marcus walked Priya Singh through the Schedule C provisions correctly, in English and in Hindi, cross-referencing the regulatory framework her team had flagged. He identified 3 additional points of miscommunication that had accumulated across the previous 45 minutes of negotiation, addressed each one in the relevant language to the relevant party, and proposed a specific revision to Clause 7 that resolved the Japanese team's timeline concern without triggering the penalty provisions in Elena's original draft. The room was silent except for his voice. He had not looked at a single document. He had not consulted notes. He had not asked anyone for anything. Elena Voss stood at the head of the table and watched the man she had dismissed in the back of a limousine dismantle, with quiet precision and complete command, every problem that had been building in this negotiation for 3 hours. She watched Tanaka lean forward, watched Singh nod, heard the Berlin technical director audibly relax on audio, and understood, with the clarity of something that cannot be unfelt, the full scope of what she had done and failed to do. When Marcus finished, Tanaka spoke to his associate. The associate turned the tablet toward the camera. The contract. Tanaka looked at Marcus and said, in the tone of a man recalling something that had stayed with him, "Still 10 languages, just like Geneva." Marcus said nothing. He held Tanaka's gaze and gave the smallest nod. The acknowledgement of a man who does not need to add anything to a moment that has already said what it needed to say. Priya Singh nodded once, clearly and deliberately, at the screen. "We are prepared to sign," Tanaka said, in English, addressing the room. "With the revised language in Clause 7 incorporated today, we are prepared to execute." Priya Singh said, "The Schedule C provisions as clarified are fully acceptable. We are ready to proceed." Rebecca looked at Elena. Elena looked at Marcus. She picked up the pen. She signed. Tanaka executed electronically. Singh executed remotely. The Berlin technical director confirmed receipt. $1 billion in infrastructure logistics contracts, the largest single agreement in Voss Dynamics' 12-year history, executed on a Tuesday evening in October in a conference suite in Washington, D.C., while a board member watching on the internal live stream sat forward in his chair in his home office and did not move for a long time. The room was quiet. Marcus picked up the broken phone from the table. "Daughter." He would call her back. The board member on the live stream was Charles Whitfield, and he had joined the session expecting to observe the controlled, unfortunate end of Elena Voss's tenure as CEO. Instead, he had watched the most significant reversal in 12 years on this board. By the time the screens had gone dark, Tanaka's team disconnecting with a warmth that had not been present an hour ago, Singh's team following with specific follow-up requests that meant genuine continued engagement. Whitfield had already messaged 3 other board members and sent a direct line to Rebecca. "Do not let Mr. Hale leave the building. Board wants to speak with him tonight." Rebecca read it. She showed it to Elena. Elena read it, set the tablet on the conference table, looked at the room, the orchids on the credenza, the untouched catering, the polished table, the chair at the head of it she had occupied for the last 2 hours. Then she turned to Marcus. He was standing near the window. He had not been invited to sit during any of this. He had not sat. Elena Voss had not delivered a genuine, unqualified apology in 8 years of company leadership. Her network knew this. Her board knew this. One former colleague had described it, off the record, as her most expensive personality trait. She had offered settlements. She had arranged quiet restructurings. She had redirected contracts in ways that communicated regret without requiring her to voice it. She stood in front of Marcus Hale, Rebecca present, 2 advance team members at the far end of the table, the hotel event coordinator still standing in the doorway where she had stopped and not left, and said, "I was wrong. No pivot, no qualifier. What I said in the car, what I said in the corridor, what I implied about who you are and what you belong to." A pause. Her eyes stayed level. "And what I did to your phone. I was wrong about all of it, and I am sorry." Marcus held the apology without deflecting it. "I appreciate that," he said. Not "it's fine." Not the automatic absolution people in her position had learned to expect would follow the right words. Just, "I appreciate that." The acknowledgement of an action without erasing its weight. Elena nodded. Her jaw held the tension of a woman sitting with a response she had not been given permission to resolve. She did not try to resolve it. Charles Whitfield arrived shortly after with 2 board members and the head of human resources. He was direct. "Mr. Hale, the board is prepared to offer you the position of Vice President of International Relations, effective immediately. Direct reports to the board. Full authority over multilateral negotiations and external partnership communications." He paused. Marcus let the pause hold. "I have 3 conditions," he said. Whitfield's expression shifted, the recalibration of a man who had expected acceptance and found himself in a different kind of meeting. "First," Marcus said, "this company changes how it treats every person who works in or around this building. Contracted drivers, facilities staff, event support, building services. Not a memo. A real change, binding and documented." Rebecca was typing. "Second, that change gets communicated to every level of this organization. including the people who are not technically employees, but show up every day anyway. He paused. Third, this company builds a process for finding people like me, people who have been put in positions beneath their actual ability because of what they look like or where they started, and gives them a real path forward. Not a program for the press release, a structural commitment. The room was quiet. Whitfield looked at the two board members beside him. One nodded. Those conditions are acceptable in principle. They are acceptable now, Marcus said. On camera. Because the live stream is still running, and I need this to be a public commitment, not a private one. He looked directly at the camera in the corner. Private commitments in this industry have a way of disappearing. Whitfield looked at the camera. He looked at Marcus. The board agrees to all three conditions, he said. Then I accept, Marcus said. He did not perform the moment. His shoulders dropped a quarter inch, barely visible, but real. The specific release of a man who has held himself rigid under sustained pressure for so long that when the pressure finally lifts, the body takes a moment to understand it is allowed to. Rebecca pressed her hand briefly to her mouth, then lowered it and went back to typing. In the doorway, the hotel event coordinator was crying. Quietly, a cloth napkin held in both hands, the cry of someone who has been carrying something alone and unacknowledged for a long time, and has just, without warning, felt less alone. Marcus saw her. He turned back to the board, but he adjusted his angle by a fraction of a degree, a shift so small it was almost invisible, that placed her inside the room rather than outside it. The kind of thing only people who have spent their careers at the margins know how to do for one another. Elena Voss saw it. Her jaw tightened once, then released. Something behind her eyes went still, not resolved, not named, but present in a way it had not been when she walked into this building tonight. MedStar Washington charged $8 for the first hour of parking. Marcus had learned this the way you learn the geography of a place you return to out of necessity. Which elevator was fastest, which nurse's station had better coffee, which night shift orderlies would nod at you in the corridor at 11:30 without needing explanation. 14 months of twice-weekly visits. He arrived at 10:40 in his car service uniform. In his left hand he carried the broken phone, its cracked screen secured with a strip of clear tape from Rebecca's bag. It worked. Barely, but it worked. He sat in the car for a moment before getting out. Not because he needed to collect himself. He had been collecting himself all evening, in corridors and elevators in the back of a service car on the way across the city. He sat because the parking structure was quiet in a way that almost nothing had been quiet since 6 that morning, and he needed 30 seconds of nothing pressing on him from any direction before he walked into a room where someone who loved him would read his face and know everything before he said a word. The fluorescent light above his parking space buzzed faintly and then held. Somewhere in the structure, a car door closed. The sound echoed once and then disappeared. He looked at the broken phone in his hand. The tape was holding the screen together at the diagonal crack, but the glass had splintered in a secondary fracture near the bottom right corner that the tape could not reach. When he pressed the home button, the display lit unevenly, brighter on one side, a faint dark bleed spreading from the corner like a bruise. It still worked. The contacts were intact. The call history was intact. Daughter. 4 missed calls. The last one time-stamped at the exact moment Elena's heel had come down. He had not called back yet. He had not been able to find a moment between the 14th floor and this parking structure where the air around him was quiet enough for that conversation to be what it needed to be. He pressed the home button again. The screen lit unevenly again. He got out of the car. The hospital's small business center was near the main entrance, a narrow room with 2 printers, a copier, and a laminator that nobody used, staffed after 8 by a man named Gerald who was 63 years old, wore the same cardigan 3 days out of 5, and had a habit of reading dense paperback biographies between tasks. Gerald looked up when Marcus came in, registered the car service uniform and the taped-together phone with no visible judgment, and went back to his book. Marcus used the printer. 1 page. The contract signing confirmation. His name on the attached sheet, the agreement terms, the board authorization. Vice President of International Relations, Voss Dynamics. He watched it feed through the printer tray and thought, for a moment, about the version of himself from 3 years ago, who had walked out of Foggy Bottom with a cardboard box and a severance letter, and had stood on the sidewalk in November trying to remember how to calculate what came next. He folded the page in thirds and put it in his jacket pocket. Gerald turned a page without looking up. Marcus said, "Good night." Gerald said, "Take care of yourself." He stopped at the hospital's small gift shop before going upstairs. Open late, perpetually, because grief and relief both tended to arrive after business hours, and neither one cared about the schedule. He stood in front of a rack of get-well cards for a moment, not buying one, just standing there in the specific stillness of a man who is delaying by 30 seconds the moment he has been moving toward all day. There was a display of small potted plants near the register, the kind that thrived on neglect and low light, the kind that hospitals stocked because they needed living things that could survive the conditions. He picked one up, set it down, picked it up again. He bought it. The elevator was slow. He stood in it and looked at the small plant in his hand, a succulent in a terracotta pot barely larger than his fist, with a white sticker on the base that said 6.99, and felt the full weight of the day arrive all at once. Not carried at arm's length the way he had been carrying it since 6 that morning. Close. Real. The specific heaviness of a thing that has mattered, finally allowed to matter. He thought about Simone, somewhere across the city in her apartment, having called 4 times and not reached him, having called Dorothy instead. He thought about the exact quality of her voice in that situation. Not panicked. Simone was never panicked, but precise and controlled, in the way that communicated to anyone who knew her that she was managing something she was not going to let herself show. She had gotten that from him. He was not sure, at this moment, whether that was something to be proud of or something to fix. The elevator opened. Dorothy Hale was awake. She was always awake when he came late. 34 years of 6th graders had permanently recalibrated her relationship to sleep, and she had never found a reason to adjust it back. She was sitting up with the television on mute, images without instructions, and when Marcus came through the door, she looked at him for 2 seconds and said, "Something happened." Not a question. "Several things," he said. He set the small plant on the windowsill beside the one she already had there, a jade plant that Simone had brought 3 weeks ago, and that Dorothy had been quietly tending by asking the night nurses to move it closer to the window during the day. The 2 plants sat side by side on the sill, with the city lights blurred in the glass behind them. Dorothy looked at the new plant. She looked at Marcus. She said nothing about the plant, which meant she had noticed it and understood it, and was choosing to let it be what it was. He sat in the chair beside the bed, the chair he had adjusted on his 3rd visit 14 months ago, so the left rear leg sat slightly over the edge of a floor tile seam and stopped it from rocking. A small fix. The kind you make when you expect to be sitting in something for a long time. He told her most of it. The call in the car, Tanaka's voice in Japanese through the speaker, the radio, Elena's laugh, the corridor on the 14th floor, the tie pin, Tanaka leaning forward on the screen, the languages, Japanese to Hindi to German to French, Clause 7, Singh nodding, the contract, the 3 conditions, the board. He told it plainly, without performance, the way he had always told her things, the way she had always made space for, by simply not interrupting, by keeping her hands still in her lap and her eyes on his face, as though what he was saying was the only thing happening in the world. When he finished, the room was quiet for a moment. Somewhere down the hall, a cart rolled past. The television on mute showed a weather map, a broad blue system moving across the Midwest, time-stamped tomorrow. Dorothy looked at him. "Your father's pin," she said. "It was the team's," Marcus said. "I know whose it was." Her voice was level and warm, the voice she used when she was saying something she had been carrying for a while and had decided it was time to put down. "Your father used to say, they can take the position, they can take the salary, they can restructure the whole apparatus, but they cannot take what you actually know. That belongs to you." She paused. He would have said the same thing tonight. Marcus looked at his hands. The faint tremor at the base of his right thumb, the one he had managed for 14 months with a specific grip on a steering wheel, was gone. He had not noticed it leaving. He noticed only now, looking at his hands in the chair beside his mother's bed, that they were entirely still. "She stepped on the phone," he said. "My daughter was calling." "I know. She called me." Dorothy's expression held the patience of a woman who had known something longer than he had, and was choosing to be gentle about it. "She got a message from the medical school this morning, a revised financial aid offer, a significant one. She wanted you to hear it from her before you saw it. She said to tell you she is not going anywhere. She is not giving up anything." Marcus sat with that. The financial aid offer. He had spent the last 4 months doing the arithmetic in his head on night shifts, working through the gap between what the school provided and what Simone would need, running the numbers on the hospital bills and the collection schedule, and what the driving work covered and what it did not. He had not told Simone he was doing this. He had not told Dorothy. He had simply been doing it. The way you do things that have no solution yet, but cannot be left undone. The arithmetic had just changed. He exhaled, slowly, fully, the kind of exhale that had been building since 6 that morning and had nowhere to go until now. He reached into his jacket pocket and set the folded printout on the bedside table. Dorothy picked it up. She unfolded it carefully, the way she had always handled paper that mattered. His acceptance letters, his State Department commission, his doctorate confirmation. With the same unhurried, complete attention she had given the book reports of children who needed to believe their words mattered to someone. She read it once. Then she read it again, which she only did when something was worth reading twice. She set it down on the blanket in front of her and kept her hand resting on it, the way you keep your hand on something you do not want to move away from yet. Her eyes were bright. She did not say anything for a moment. In the corridor outside, the cart passed again, going the other direction. The weather map on the television had shifted to a new region. The jade plant and the new succulent sat side by side on the windowsill, catching the ambient light from the city below. She put her hand over his. "There's my son," she said. Her voice did not break. Dorothy Hale's voice had never broken in front of him, not once in 49 years. Not when his father died, not when the diagnosis came. Not during any of the appointments that had followed. It did not break now, but it held something in it that he recognized as the weight of every moment she had watched him carry something alone, because he thought protecting her required it, and the quiet, absolute refusal to let him do that anymore. He turned his hand over under hers and held it. They sat like that for a while, the television on mute, the city lights soft behind the window glass, the 2 plants on the sill, the folded paper between them. And neither of them said anything, because there was nothing left that needed saying. He called Simone the next morning, before the office, sitting in his car in the hospital parking structure with the engine off and the windows fogged slightly at the edges from the cold. She answered on the second ring. "Dad." "How is the rotation?" "Hard. Good hard." A pause. "Grandma told me about the pin. She said you used to polish it when you thought she wasn't watching." Marcus looked at the tie pin on his jacket lapel. He had put it back on that morning without deciding to, the way you reach for something that has always meant something before the day gets complicated enough to need it. She notices everything, he said. She told me you almost didn't say anything, in the car. She said you held it for a long time. I did, he said. What made you decide? He looked out through the fogged window at the concrete of the parking structure. The same structure he had walked into the night before, carrying a broken phone and a folded piece of paper. The same one he had been walking into twice a week for 14 months, hat down, phone on silent, moving through a system that had been built without him in mind, and had never quite gotten around to noticing. Tanaka's team had spent months preparing, he said. Singh's team had spent months preparing. It was about to fall apart because of a miscommunication I could see clearly and she could not. You do not calculate whether that is your job to fix. You just fix it. Grandma said it was simpler than that. What did she say? She said you have never once in your life been able to watch something fail when you know how to stop it. She said you have been that way since you were 7 years old, and you rewired the classroom clock because your teacher said it was broken. A beat. The clock needed a new battery, Marcus said. That is not rewiring. Simone laughed, unguarded and full, the laugh she had inherited directly from Dorothy, the one that arrived without permission and filled whatever space it was in. Marcus let it land. He thought about the engineer who was now redesigning routing architecture for Southeast Asia from a window office after 2 years in facilities maintenance because a visa delay had taken his previous role and no one had thought to ask what else he could do. He thought about the 14 people. He thought about the hotel event coordinator in the doorway, holding a cloth napkin, crying the quiet cry of someone who has been alone with something for too long. It was not enough. It would not be enough for a long time. There were more rooms, more corridors, more people standing at the margins of spaces built entirely without them in mind, doing the work, carrying the weight, waiting for a moment that might never come. But the system had moved, visibly, in a direction it had not been moving the day before. And that was how it started. Not with a speech, not with a gesture, not with a single extraordinary moment of justice descending from somewhere above. It started with a man in a driver's uniform who understood 10 languages, who had every reason to stay silent, and who decided, one more time, that he was not willing to watch something fail when he knew how to fix it. He had been in this parking structure dozens of times. Today, for the first time, he did not feel like a man passing through a space that belonged to someone else.